LAWsome by ConsultWebs. Breakthrough insights to build a thriving law firm with your host, Tanner Jones.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another LAWsome podcast. Today's focus, we're going to be talking about digitizing a legal practice and even what that means. I'm excited to have our guest here, Daniel Steinberg. He's the co-founder and the CEO of Lawbrokr. He has a pretty multifaceted background ranging from professional services, marketing technology, and especially now legal technology. Lawbrokr, his company, is a pre-qualification platform that helps lawyers humanize the way clients interact with their law firms. Today's topics, we're going to talk through what digitizing means for a law firm. We're going to really tap into Daniel's experience on what types of tools are no-brainers for law firms today, what do they need to make sure they have in place, and then we're going to wrap that all up around the big topic of accountability, how to understand if a particular tech platform actually works well for your firm, and how to set yourself up for success there. So Daniel, thanks so much for taking time to join the LAWsome podcast.
Tanner, thanks for having me. I'm excited for this one. It's going to be good.
Absolutely, yeah. Lawbrokr has definitely got a lot of attention in the marketplace, and I hope to find some time to talk about it. But first, let's talk about just this overarching topic of digitizing a law firm. I think many of us can make some assumptions on what that actually means, but what does it mean in your world? How do you explain that to a law firm?
Yeah, usually when I break it down, the first thing I do is try and allow everyone from a mental capacity to really put themselves in a consumer's shoes and understand how they shop for everyday goods and services and the way that they transact online. I think taking your lawyer hat off and recognizing that you're a consumer of everyday goods and services and make purchase decisions every single day and try to emulate those experiences with your law practice is super important. And that's usually how I start the conversation, just to put a bit of a different mindset shift into how they think about their overarching practice. But when I think about the overall view and defining the landscape of digitization of your law practice, it's creating new forms of engagement to allow people to engage with you across a multifaceted approach. And what that looks like is traditionally you're getting people perhaps to brick and mortar, phone conversations, and so forth. But we see this big wave of what I refer to, and what you and I would refer to as digital transformation, of all these consumers of legal goods and services starting to really focus on capturing and engaging with law firms online. And I think when we think about what that looks like, it's not just having a website. It goes beyond the means of just a website and really expanding your brand across all digital assets throughout the internet. That could mean YouTube, social media, your website, Google My Business, Google AdWords, marketplaces. For a law firm, digitization should mean scaling your business in a multitude of different ways so that you can actively be found online, and then subsequently making adjustments to actually allow for people to engage with you in that format. And that's, naturally the progression of what we would talk about today.
Yeah, so very comprehensive with respect to, if it's digital, that's a part of it, likely. If it's online or somebody can access it, then that's a big part of it. But I really like what you said in terms of it first starts with how people are even interacting with your law firm, and more importantly, how are they interacting with other businesses and where they're not interacting with you? What are you missing, basically? So all of that makes sense, and it sounds good. I think our listeners would agree. Like, everyone wants a lot of what you just explained. From your experience, why aren't law firms pursuing a full-on attack on, digitization within the marketplace? What are the hesitations or fears preventing them from doing that?
Yeah, I think I want to take the approach of not suggesting that perhaps there's fear, but perhaps a bit of a laggard mentality or lack of education on ultimately how to digitize your practice. I think a lot of firms think that digitization starts and stops with a website, but it actually goes beyond that breadth. And obviously, as a marketing agency, you scale in a magnitude of different ways for those law firms, and there's a bunch of different tools in place to allow for what allows you to ultimately capture client interest in a digital fashion. So I think it's not necessarily a fear so much as it is getting on podcasts and learning and educating yourself about what that means. And it's just become this sort of laggard mentality of, we haven't, as a legal industry, looked at other professional services and other industries and tried to emulate those experiences to make it really conducive for how we interact with our potential consumers, so much as it has been understanding what other law firms are doing and emulating those experiences. So what it's created is this sort of hyper focusedness around how do we create really comprehensive and nice looking websites, which is great. Don't get me wrong. We need to start with that. And that's where, the SEO and the digital front door comes from. But there's a lot of different tool sets in place that ultimately help you scale in a digital way. And I think that's the piece where we focus a lot on educating and making sure that law firms understand that in order to actually progress their businesses online. There's a lot of different goals, right, that ultimately matter for your law firm. There's brand awareness, there's SEO, there's conversion events, there's, revenue generating activities versus activities that ultimately build your brand online. Based off all those different elements and scoreability, you have to implement the right types of solutions and the right type of content to ultimately engage appropriately based off those specific mandates and goals. So I think I argue that it's a bit more of an education gap that needs to be fulfilled as opposed to a fear.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that. I think with respect to fear, certainly that may be an overhyped term, but I do know that coming across lawyers at events, different conferences, hearing them talk about various software, one big piece on that is just the lack of awareness, which speaks to your point on the education, but lack of awareness around data and privacy concerns. So maybe speak to that. What's been your experience there, and especially maybe for beginners or those who are hesitant to pursue a wide range of technology, how can they be assured that certain confidentiality can remain confidential, especially when it's a lawyer-client relationship that they're protecting?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I try and stay away from the regulations, right? I think, any software company that wants to get in that game is great. But at the end of the day, it's your law firm, it's your client attorney privilege. It's all these different nuances that are super important that you have to protect your own brand with. And I think when it comes down to partnering with the right type of technology, there does become a due diligence period of understanding what are, the privacy policies, the TOSs that we're signing on for? What are, how do you house our data and store our data? Is it ours versus yours? What is able to be found upon online? What does that look like? And I think from a privacy perspective, that's super important. And at the end of the day, that's the diligence part of the law firm to take on. I think a lot of different businesses have focused on security and data privacy, especially if you are within the legal tech landscape, because you know how regulated it is. And from a confidentiality perspective, it's incredibly important. So for us, at least, we just act as an intermediary solution. But at the end of the day, everything is actually engaging with the attorney and the potential new client. And they're actually opting into the attorney and law firm's terms of services and privacy policies. And we're just that front end bridge. And I think that's super important, is that clarity of where does the engagement start and end, and who are we quote unquote contracting with or engaging with, especially on the consumer side, right? They definitely don't read the terms of service or the check boxes or things like that ultimately they're continuing on with. So, having the law firm feel confident in that and making sure that it is between them and the potential client is super important.
Let's change gears slightly here, but it feels like there's a new piece of technology for every problem a business has in a law firm today. And then on top of that, every opportunity that's available for law firms, there's also likely a tech stack for. And so it can get a bit overwhelming for law firms, from my experience, especially with respect to being able to prioritize. Where do I begin? I know I need this, and this, but I don't know where to start. Do you have any words of wisdom or tips on how to begin to prioritize, where to even begin? And I think this conversation likely leads into other tools that we can talk about that's available to law firms.
It's an interesting question because there is a lot of technology and law firms get a lot of inbound inquiries from sales reps and so forth. And it frustrates them for sure, because it's like, what technology is too much technology, and how does this impact my firm, and downtime migration, onboarding, training, and so forth. It's incredibly impactful and sometimes incredibly invasive to a law firm. And I used to sort of manage the app ecosystem over at Clio. So I was working with 200 plus app partners. And if you just mentioned there's far more than 200, and there's a problem for the most minuscule issues, and there's, being solved by a specific piece of technology. Sometimes I think implementing to technology could actually be harmful, and over invasive to a law firm. And the way that I tell law firms to think about it is try and figure out what the ultimate goals are of your law firm and what you're trying to solve within those goals, because there will be pieces of technology to be able to do that and solve for that. That's sort of my core advice at the pinpoint of the starting point, excuse me. But at the end of the day, like, it comes down to what the needs are and how efficient you want to be and how it can operationalize your law firm. So I think there is the right type of technology for each part of the phase of a law firm, whether that be the digital side, the website side, the conversion side, which is sort of what I put into this bucket of, okay, pre-client retainer, there's this whole verse over here, and that typically sits in the like sales and marketing bucket. Then that falls into, okay, well, once we have potential new clients, we're ultimately going to have to intake and have a solution in CRM that can automate things, report on different metrics, and so forth. That's the next bucket. Then I look at the core operating systems, which most of the listeners probably have already, but those are the Clios, the My Cases, of the world, right? And then you've got one step further. Okay, now we've retained clients. We probably need some sort of client portal. And then it funnels into some sort of reputation management, which drives reviews, which has this cyclical event to then start at the top of the funnel. So I think those are like the core pieces that I look at and say, if you are starting a law firm, that is the ultimate funnel that you need to think about. Those are kind of like the 5 sources of truth that it's a no-brainer. It has to exist. And then there's different tool sets within those that you can start to layer on in order to make yourself more operationally efficient, like, different tools that make your documents and your contract language faster and easier with the word AI, and so on and so forth, right? So I think once you have the core systems in place, it's then building blocks around that. And the nice part is that all these different solutions have allowed for other solutions to be building blocks around it. And I think that's what's important. So it's more of like the mindset of, how do I start, and what is that overarching tech stack that I'm looking for? Kind of like a law firm in a box. And then from there, how do I plug in different pieces that are key and specific for me and my practice?
Yeah, very helpful. Maybe give an example of one of those buckets, like, whether it's operations. What are some of those bolt-on concepts, just so our listeners have a good understanding of that?
Yeah, I think bolt-on solutions are ones that, again, play into the space of, okay, we have the client, we retain the client, they're living in some sort of operating system that is our core source of truth. Now we need to draft, document, communicate, and so forth. Bolt-on solutions around those solutions are things like a client portal, maybe like a HONA or a case status. Other solutions that help with contracting, like a spell book, right? Where you can adjust different language, populate new contract documents, so on and so forth. Maybe then you've got something like a gavel that automates different PDF automations, right? So there's a bunch of different solutions based off the needs within your law firm, or quite frankly, different practice groups that might want to take on different solutions that don't overarchingly impact the firm as a whole. And I think that's how I look at and think about different sort of bolt-on solutions. You could have one user in a 75-person law firm that wants to use a specific solution that makes them more efficient, that helps with their specific practice area or their specific client, and then from there roll it out accordingly. But I think the core tech stack obviously has some sort of impact overall on the firm, and that's where the training, the migration, the onboarding, and so forth happens. And that's sort of your biggest investment. It's not just the investment in technology, it's the investment in time and making sure that your firm is going to operate as efficiently as possible.
I know Lawbrokr, which is the software you've created, fits more into that conversion in the marketing bucket, if you will, in terms of how you found ways to build efficiencies in the conversion process. Maybe speak to that and speak to more so the power of being able to make influences in converting the right kind of traffic on a website.
Yeah. Great point. And that's exactly what we do. So we fit into this bucket of marketing and conversion. And I think it plays nicely into what you guys do, which is, hey, we're an agency. We do a bunch of different pieces for your law firm in order to essentially drive traffic. What Lawbrokr is doing is based off the traffic that you're driving to different web properties, whether that be landing pages, social media, your website, Google Ads, you name it, referral sources. Lawbrokr's job is to say, out of those people knocking on your front door, your digital front door, are we letting enough people in that door and qualifying them appropriately? A lot of law firms don't think about the overarching conversion of their law firm, which has direct tie to revenue and ROI for their business from a digital perspective. So a lot of firms drive traffic, which is huge, right? From the brand awareness side, you're getting readers on blogs. People know who you are and what your services are. Our job is to say, how do we implement different solutions that emulate consumer buying habits, like things on your cell phone, Instagram quizzes, TikTok, and so forth, to cultivate and create these really strong, sort of hyper-focused buying journeys to sort of allow consumers to self-diagnose and self-bucket themselves into the services that you offer, and then gamify that approach in order to capture the right types of data that your law firm is ultimately looking for and funnel that into whatever intake management system you're using. It has sort of three core elements. The first piece is, how do we let more people in the door while driving better quality data and standardization across the board? Pre-qualify the client so that they actually can educate and self-educate themselves, right? A lot of the time, 99% of the time, consumers have never used a lawyer before. They're uneducated on the space. They think they have a problem, but they might not know if you can solve for it. Our job is to sort of self-diagnose and self-educate in that same vein. And then from there, we really help intake staff prioritize the right types of clients, speed to lead, take lead to conversion faster, but also, echo the way that they drive a better client experience. I think taking the current model, which is let's play 21 questions and make sure you're a fit, which every law firm can do, because don't forget, they're going to reach out to more than one, versus changing the overall perception of what the needs are of the consumer and putting them first and really sort of self-guiding them and driving conviction and better understanding of their needs and how you can support them, really has a mental mind shift of how your law firm can actually deal with their problem space, which gives you a high competitive advantage at the end of the day in order to retain that client.
Yeah, it's a fascinating way to build engagement. Like, that's what every marketer is often looking for, is how can we just continue to further engage the right types of prospective clients? And because engagement allows for time to interact, and as long as that's a positive interaction and there's value given, what you're doing is you're building confidence in that buyer's journey. And just to kind of step back so our listeners understand, often there are three main ways that someone would convert through a website. And I welcome a disagreement on that, Daniel, but from my experience, it's often the phone, it's live chat, if you have that available, and it's contact forms. And what I understand of Lawbrokr is really a somewhat of a, I'll say a hybrid to some degree of a live chat and a contact form, in that it creates a much more interactive experience with the user when they get there. And it's not just asking for, these 3 fields or these 18 fields of information. It's getting them bought in step by step. Would you agree with that, first and foremost?
Yeah, I would. I agree that there's 3 ways to engage in no particular order. But at the end of the day, Lawbrokr specifically is replacing that web form experience. And the reason that's so key in legal, listen, web forms are great for specific things that you're trying to capture, maybe a webinar sign up or things like that. But the challenge in legal is that you're asking someone to describe their problem, but they haven't even understood if you can support them. So they're saying things like, I need help, or they're giving you a sob story or a massive blurb, or you're getting spam into your inbox, so on and so forth. we're trying to, again, create this self-education element that essentially guides consumers to understand the nuances so much more. And yes, if you talk about the hybrid between the two, we call it conversational marketing. It's how do we actually create these conversations without actively having a live human on the other side of it. So we don't replace a live chat or a chat bot. We don't replace phone calls. Those things are great ways to engage. Our perspective is, how do you make sure you meet customers everywhere that they want to engage with you on? And one of those places is this. And we do it by leveraging hyperlinks so that you can really place Lawbroker links on every digital asset across the board in order to create that standardization for your firm.
Yeah, you started off this conversation in talking about, when you start to assess tech for your law firm, start first with the user and being able to build efficiencies. What are they leaning on? How are they using their mobile devices today? How are they interacting with other businesses? And how can a law firm continue to implement those to improve the overall communication? And that's, I see Lawbroker really filling specific needs in that respect and going well beyond what a contact form would do. The other point I would make, which I've seen, you mentioned, where we talked about 18 fields in a standard contact form, whatever you're asking for, name, email address, phone number, comments. That's usually the more basic forms. But I've seen some firms that have the most extensive contact forms asking for all types of information. And you think about the psyche of that, how someone is internalizing that. Usually they're on their mobile device, and so this looks like, it's going to take them an hour to complete. And you immediately begin to create skepticism. You immediately begin to plant doubt, and most often you lose those types of users. And so again, coming back to Lawbroker, that's such a beautiful concept in that it's staging them through. It's not all, it's not immediately intrusive. It's not asking them, for their mother's maiden name and their social security number. It's guiding them intentionally through that buyer's journey.
Yeah.
And I would challenge all of our listeners to continue to think that way when you're assessing tech. Is this going to complicate our internal systems or processes and or complicate the overall experience that someone has with our law firms? That's the first question to ask. And then if it leads into no, it's actually going to improve and save time, then clearly that's a tech to explore further and walk through.
For sure. And I think just to drill into that point one step deeper, because it's incredibly relevant, is I want everyone to know that I'm not myself or our platform or anything like that. We don't replace the intake process. I just think that you have to think about it more as a phased approach. There's a time and place for intake. There's a time and place for a static contact form, and so on and so forth. But you need to bucket it appropriately in order to drive consumer engagement and make them feel warm and welcome to your law firm. And I think one of those and buckets that we really focus on is we are a pre-intake solution. The forms that you're referring to, those are what, most law firms call publicly facing intake forms. There is a time and place for those in order to capture all that data. It's usually after that first conversation. We're trying to augment that first conversation. We're not even replacing it, but the more data you have on that potential consumer, the more likely you can take lead to conversion. You can understand their problems, if you can help them, if you want to refer it out, are they within your jurisdiction, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a ton of different elements that actually create a much more powerful decision-making tree for you if you capture that data up front.
Makes a lot of sense. So we've definitely drilled down into a niche topic specifically around conversion on a website. So let's step back, high level from a tech standpoint. If a firm is going to begin implementing some new tech tools into their efforts next year, a big question that I would have is, how are you going to measure results? How would you approach that with a law firm? I mean, how long should law firms give certain tech to assess whether it's actually working? What guidance would you give our listeners?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time when I speak to law firms, the decision-making process is almost like monthly. The ROI transition and conversations are monthly. I look at everything as an annualized budget. Obviously, I'm not going to speak to other solutions or other elements of the funnel that Lawbroker doesn't specifically, focus on. But marketing as a bucket as a whole is an annual budget that you have to think about and actually look at that from a tiered approach throughout a 365-day period. I don't think you can just implement something and instantaneously it's working. Perhaps like Google Ads and things like that. But from a technology perspective, everything is a factor of your marketing. You have a slow month, it's Christmas, et cetera, and something doesn't convert or work. Well, that's a factor of what, the surroundings of your practice are. And I think that's really important to remember and understand. But the secondary piece is when you're looking at technologies to invest in, think about the ROI over a 365-day period. Not, do I have budget for this because I have a tight budget over 365 days. It's what is the results that this could drive over a 365-day period. Don't look at it as an expense on a monthly cadence, because you have to look at it as a holistic. And that's how I think about it. And I think technology in general has to ebb and flow, which is why, annual budgets are great. But at the end of the day, if something comes along your desk that can make you more operationally efficient or drive further growth to your practice, you have to evaluate it. It's crucial too. Other firms are using it. It might drive a competitive disadvantage if you don't at least evaluate it for your firm.
And what I hear from that too is really having a shared understanding of what that end result is. I mean, you mentioned ROI, and sometimes, most often from a marketing standpoint, it should be around return. What are you getting back from it? But sometimes that measure of success could be something entirely different. Maybe it's, saving your paralegal 15 hours a week eventually from a certain system. But what I hear you saying again is define that end result. What are you going after? And then measure against that end result on an ongoing basis. But clearly don't give up too early before the software has a time to actually produce value for the firm. Because the other thing too, which we haven't really got into, is the whole idea of buy-in, internal buy-in. Let's end with that topic of tech and how important it is for those using it to actually use it and leverage it. Have you had experiences in that?
Yeah, I was actually just going to make this point, so I'm glad that this is like the final topic of conversation. But I think a core realization for law firms when they're evaluating technology is this doesn't have to. I know a lot of law firms operate in partnerships, so take this with a grain of salt. Personally, I think that you should have tech teams or department heads that evaluate different technologies that are valuable for them, and they have budget to make decisions based off specific thresholds. And if it crosses a specific threshold, perhaps then it goes to a partnership, etc. But the challenge with internal buy-in is that when someone's evaluating a piece of technology for them, their department, their teams, and it might not be a firm-wide engagement, the problem space is not going to resonate with the person that ultimately has to maybe sign off on it or make that decision. So that's why I urge a lot of law firms to think about what specific software impacts what specific person or team, etc., and let them do the evaluation and sort of get the buy-in internally, as opposed to starting at the top and saying, here's the problem that I know exists in your law firm, so you should buy. I think I talk to, my direct approach is always with intake directors, office administration, marketing / operations. Those are the 4 core buyers of our solution. And that's the only conversations I have, unless naturally it's, a 5-person firm or something like that, 10-person firm where the managing partner is very hands-on and understands the problem space. But I do urge a lot of law firms from a buy-in perspective to let team members evaluate different tech solutions that could be impactful for them specifically, and then drive the internal buy-in upwards, as opposed to let me evaluate it, because you might not feel that problem, in which case then you can't actually, understand how this could be solved for.
Daniel, I've enjoyed the discussion. Any closing thoughts or advice for our listeners as we wrap up here?
No, I think that work off your status quo. There's a lot of obviously surrounding noise, and a lot of law firms adopt different types of tech solutions and have different types of problems than you might have. And I think it's really important to evaluate internally what some of the challenges are that you're looking to solve for, and then build from there. And you will find the right solutions for your firm in order to scale, whether that be on the front end side or the internal operations side. But really just, one, understand within what your specific firm's problems are and build up from there. And second, I urge everyone to take their lawyer hats off or law firm hats off and really put yourself in the consumer's shoes and understand if we're operating properly for the consumers that ultimately want to engage with us.
Great encouragement. And I would share, that if you're sitting there and debating on whether you want to pursue a certain tech stack because someone in your firm has brought it to you, that last point Daniel made is important. Those that are, in the trenches in your business, they know what the problems are, most certainly. Listen to them. There are a ton of options out there for law firms to build more efficiencies within their operations and truly help more clients, produce more revenue. So good encouragement. Daniel, how can people find you online?
Yeah, you can. I'm very active on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect at linkedin.com/in/dsteinberg9. You can follow Lawbrokr on all socials or visit our website if you want to learn more at LAWbrokr.com. And yeah, I urge everyone to reach out, whether it's for Lawbrokr or, a piece of advice that I've given on this call that you want to drill in deeper on. Happy to have that conversation.
Thanks again. Great having you on.
Thanks so much for having me.
LAWsome by ConsultWebs with Tanner Jones. For show notes, links, and info, go to consultwebs.com/podcast. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Watch for the next LAWsome episode to discover more breakthrough insights to build a thriving law firm.